Hello and welcome to Hermetic Journeys. I'm your host Tony G, and man, it's been a long time since our last video, and I apologize for that, but there's a reason for it, and you'll soon understand what that is. This, of course, is the third video in a series on alchemy, which is part of the greater series on Atalanta Fugiens. Why did we take this detour? To gain a better understanding of the alchemical processes, the nomenclature, the spirituality behind Atalanta Fugiens, because Michael Meyer was a practicing alchemist, and he used a lot of these theories and operations in imagery in the book. So in order for us to truly understand Atalanta Fugiens, we had to kind of delve into this realm. And let me be honest with you, it's fascinating. Hard as hell, but fascinating, okay? I hit so many brick walls over the past few months. I've been studying alchemy for 3 years, and I've been guided to this place over the last 62 years by some unseen hand. And I'm very grateful because this stuff is so fascinating and so powerful, and it can really help us because remember, alchemists are making medicines. They're trying to help people here. This is an altruistic thing, okay? So one of the main reasons it took me so long to do this video was the ancient manuscripts of detailing laboratory operations are very, very complex. They're encoded. They, just like the imagery in Atalanta Fugiens, right? You have to know a little bit about everything to really understand what's going on in one of those images, right? We looked at the first two, and man, there's a lot of stuff there, right? We had to look into Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Egyptian mythology, philosophy, history, science, chemistry. Oh my goodness. So there's so much to this. Well, the metals are even more complex than the plant work. And so that's why it took me probably 2 months to get to this point where I could even discuss it. Remember, I'm not a practicing alchemist, although I will remedy that within the next year, I hope. But I think I can present this information to you in a way that you will understand it, and because it's helped me understand a lot. I've learned a lot over the past few months. So I'm going to sum up the past few months of work with an expression by a practicing alchemist named Robert Bartlett. And let me tell you something, if you want to learn about alchemy, there's your go-to guy. He has several books, which I own, of course, on practical alchemy. In other words, work in the lab. And he goes into the spiritual component too. Because don't let anybody tell you that alchemy is not a spiritual pursuit. Okay? It is. Deeply spiritual. And we'll get into that too. One of the things that he wrote, and when I was reading it, it really struck me, and not physically, of course, but and here it is. One thing can be called by many different names, just as many things can be called by one name. Okay? Think about that. So you can be reading an alchemical manuscript describing the purification of Mercury, and they'll use a particular term. And you go, oh, okay, that's what that is. And then you read another manuscript, and it's a completely different term. You go, wait a minute, I thought it was this. So that's what we're dealing with here, and that's why it took me so long to get to this place. And you'll see, because I'm going to read you an excerpt, and just to demonstrate what I've been going through. And, you know, if I had hair, it would have fallen out. I guess I would look the same then, wouldn't I? Anyway, so let's take a look at this particular, and this is taken from a book called The Alchemist's Handbook by Frater Albertus. Incredible stuff. Okay, and it was written, this particular document, let me find the title here. This particular document is called The Open Entrance to the Closed Palace of the King by a man named George Starkey. Now, George Starkey was an alchemist who lived in the colonies. He moved from England, of course, relocated, and pursued alchemy in the colonies. He eventually moved back to England because he found we didn't have the resources here yet, the industry to support what he needed in terms of his alchemical experiments. And it's a kind of a sad story about George Starkey because although he was deeply respected by people like Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle, who was known as the father of modern chemistry, he felt that the father of modern chemistry took advantage of him in some ways. So he went by a pseudonym as well. He wrote a body of work under the pseudonym of Irenaeus Philalethes. Okay, and Irenaeus Philalethes was held in high esteem in these circles, really incredible stuff, but a sad story. So I'm going to read you an excerpt from this particular document, and this deals with the purification of mercury. So we're purifying mercury to get it to break down gold, all right, so we can create the Philosopher's Stone. And remember, the Philosopher's Stone is a universal panacea. Again, we're talking about helping humanity, about creating elixirs and potions and oils and things like, not potions, oils, that's for you Harry Potter fans, oils and things like that, so people can take them and be healed, right? So here we go. You ready? Put your thinking caps on. They sought active sulfur in a pure state and found it cunningly concealed in the house of the ram. This sulfur mingled most eagerly with the offspring of Saturn, and the desired effect was speedily produced after the malignant venom of the air of Mercury had been tempered, and as already set forth at some length, by the doves of Venus. Okay. So we have to break this down, okay, of course, and it's like looking at one of those beautiful images by Matthias Marion from Atalanta Fugiens, right? It's this, whoa, this is really enigmatic. Okay, it is a good word. So I'm going to take this sentence by sentence and interpret it for you. They sought active sulfur in a pure state and found it cunningly concealed in the house of the ram. House of the ram. All right, when I think of the house of the ram, when I hear house and ram together, I think astrology. So you have to know a little bit about astrology here. So when I think of the ram, of course, is the astrological symbol of Aries. Okay, all right, we're getting somewhere here. And then when I think of Aries, the planetary ruler of Aries is Mars, right? Okay, and then when I think of Mars, the metal that's associated with Mars is iron. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere. So he's talking about iron here in this particular operation. This sulfur mingled with most eagerly with the offspring of Saturn. Okay, now here's the curveball. I thought the offspring of Saturn was lead, okay, because we affiliate Saturn with lead. Well, I do. Most people affiliate Saturn with the beautiful rings. But I'm just weird. Anyway, so that's what we normally associate it with when we're talking about alchemical operations. However, it's misleading because Starkey uses this in other documents, and this information doesn't come from me. This isn't my research. This little section, this little piece here, this comes from a man named William Newman, who was a brilliant chemist and historian who actually takes these alchemical manuscripts and recreates them in a modern laboratory. And it's just so fascinating. So check out his stuff too, if you're into this kind of thing. So the offspring of Saturn actually is referring to antimony. Now, antimony is a metal that is very, very important in purifying mercury, all right, which then can break down gold to create the Philosopher's Stone. All right, we're going to learn more about that later. So we're talking about antimony. So now we're talking about iron and antimony in this particular operation. All right, and the desired effect was speedily produced after the malignant venom of the air of Mercury had been tempered. So now we're talking about, okay, Mercury, as we know, can put off some pretty deadly fumes. And just ask Isaac Newton. So anyway, and of course, venom of the air, I think that's an allegory, alluding to the noxious fumes from Mercury when it is included in these operations. All right. By the doves of Venus, as already set forth at some length, by the doves of Venus. So when we think about Venus, the metal associated with it is copper. So apparently copper is used to temper some of the noxious fumes, okay, that are produced in this particular operation. So, wow. All right, so we've unpacked this. And the more of these manuscripts that you read concerning these operations, when you begin to unlock these keys, you go, wow, I know what he's talking about. This is so cool. Just like when we looked at the etchings in Atalanta Fugiens and how incredibly profound, and then when we begin to interpret what they mean, it just has so much meaning and it's so rich, And so why did alchemists do this? Why did they encode these texts? Well, several reasons, but I think the primary reason is we have to think back to our good friend Heinrich Kunrad, all right? And in his oratory and laboratory, he would go and pray before he went into the lab. So anything that happened in the lab was seen as a revelation from God, okay? So this was very spiritual, deeply spiritual, very personal stuff. And, you know, maybe alchemists didn't want to reveal this to everybody. So they encoded it for their fellow alchemists who truly understood what was going on. We look at the puffers, right? Like my brother Kenny, the puffer. The puffers, of course, were just making gold, all right? And they weren't really concerned with this deeply spiritual nature about in these operations. So maybe they didn't want to give that information to these people. They felt they weren't worthy of it. Okay, that's one theory of mine. I think, of course, there are other theories concerning more practical reasons. You know, in the case of George Starkey, maybe he didn't want to give away the keys to the kingdom to people who were taking advantage of him. Okay, so that's kind of the rationale behind it. And that kind of closes this little section on the operations. But I do want to mention some other things here before we go to the next section. And that is working with these metals is extremely dangerous, inherently dangerous, because there are two ways to break down a metal in the alchemical path: the wet way and the dry way. The wet way uses acids and salts to break down the metal to the three constituent components, which we know, of course, by now, and you could probably recite them: mercury, sulfur, and salt, all right? And that, okay, you're using acids to break things down. You can burn your hands, you can start a fire, God knows. And then you've got the dry way, which uses intense heat, flame, right? And to break down the metals. And we're talking about intensity. We're not talking about, 200 degrees. You turn your oven on 200 degrees and you cook a pizza. Well, 400 degrees for pizza, whatever. We're talking about some pretty intense heat here. So inherently dangerous. Not only that, but whether you're using acids or heat, you're talking about releasing noxious fumes, like hydrogen sulfide gas and mercury fumes, right? So most alchemists would start in the plant realm and then move to the metallic realm to do the work, because you have to have the experience and the knowledge to know what to do and what not to do, okay? So that's kind of the big picture here, and we are now going to delve into the alchemical operations, the 3 phases and 7 steps of the alchemical operations in the next section. I hope you've enjoyed this section. I hope it's made sense to you. It's taken me a long time to get here. I hope you appreciate that. Just kidding. Anyway, so let's go to the next section, the operations of the alchemical process. Hello, we're back, and we're going to talk about the 3 phases and 7 operations of the alchemical process. I want you to understand that these operations and these phases were not necessarily done in the specific order that we're going to talk about. In fact, some of the operations were left out, depending on what the alchemist was doing. Some of the operations were in different order. Like everything else in alchemy, it's always a little complicated, or a lot complicated, as the case may be. So, if we look at, in general, the 3 phases of the alchemical operations, all right, we've got the black phase, the white phase, and the red phase. The black phase is all about breaking down our metal, okay, so that we can work with its constituent components. We know all about that from the plant work, right? The white phase is all about purifying the metal, purifying the remnants of what came out of the black phase. We're purifying it so we can work with it in the red phase. And the red phase is called the red phase because the philosopher's stone, as we know, is a waxy red substance. And depending on what the alchemist decides to do with the philosopher's stone will determine what operations that follow the red phase, which we're not going to get into. But the red phase is essentially the phase where the philosopher's stone is created. Okay? The black phase includes 2 operations, calcination and dissolution. Calcination involves the breaking down of our metal by using fire or solutions. Dissolution involves the immersion of the metal in a solvent of some kind to break it down as well. The white phase contains two operations as well: separation and conjunction. In separation, we remove the important components that remain after the black phase, like taking the chocolate chips out of the chocolate chip cookie. Conjunction, we recombine those components and purify them so that they may be used in the next phase. The red phase contains three operations: fermentation, distillation, and coagulation. The fermentation phase, the alchemist reintroduces a revitalizing agent, as our amalgam, it's what we now call our matter, has gone through the purification of the white phase and is somewhat drained of its life force. In distillation, the matter is distilled, further purified, and in coagulation, it is recombined to create the Philosopher's Stone. You can think of the black phase as the dark night of the soul. And also remember that these operations were linked to deeply spiritual manifestations within the alchemist. So for instance, we spoke many times of our good friend Heinrich Kunrad, right, and his oratory and laboratory. And that these revelations that occurred in the laboratory were of God. They were deeply spiritual. In addition to those things, within the alchemist, they were going through some deeply spiritual reevaluation, looking at themselves as a person and try to become more spiritual, more enlightened. Because that's what this is about enlightenment as well, within the alchemist. So what we're looking at here is an operation in a laboratory and an operation within the alchemist, a spiritual revelation, if you will. And the creation of the Philosopher's Stone in the laboratory is vindication that the alchemist has also become more spiritual. And it's because this process we're talking about, creating the Philosopher's Stone, took somewhere around 2 years, sometimes longer, depending on what they're doing. And of course, there's a lot of symbology involved, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Typically, the metal we're going to be working with gold in this particular instance, and mercury. And typically, gold and sometimes sulfur were referred to as the king or the red king. Okay? And mercury, or sometimes other products, okay, were referred to as the white queen. This whole process is about the getting together of the king and the queen to create a child called the philosopher's child. Now, the Negredo phase, or the black phase, I'm using the snooty Latin term. Boy, I feel snooty already, don't you? Anyway, the black phase of alchemy can be considered the dark night of the soul, and that's what I was getting to. So when I say the dark night of the soul, not only are we taking our substance, whatever it is, and we're burning it, or we're liquefying it, the alchemist is going through the same process, kind of saying, am I spiritual enough? Am I close to God? Am I close to nature? I need to be more spiritual, okay? Because that's the goal. Now remember, we talked about the wet way and the dry way, okay? So we have the wet way represented by the red dragon, which involved salts and solutions to break down the metal. They weren't using fire specifically. And the dry way was the black dragon working with fire. Not exclusively either. So again, here we have these two methodologies within the alchemical process, but they were sometimes interchanged. So you may find some work being done using chemicals or solutions to break down the metal, okay, like something called aqua regia. Anytime you see regal, regia, we're talking about the king. Aqua, of course, meaning water, royal water. It was a solution of chemicals that could actually liquefy gold or melt gold, or break it down, I should say, okay, without having to put it under a fire. But sometimes fire was also employed in that operation. Just like in the dry way, when alchemists are using flame to move the operation along, they may be using solutions as well. So what I'm saying here is nothing is set in stone, the philosopher's stone, if you will, okay? Because these operations can be modified and put out of sequence. All right, so before we can talk about the 3 phases of alchemy, what they employ, as you know, this is going to get a little dicey, a little complicated, and I've done my best to simplify it, but I want you to see what alchemists went through in their laboratories. Now, because I'm not a practicing alchemist, my information is more than likely incomplete. I have had a lot of help from some people. A gentleman named Steve Kallick is a practicing alchemist in Quebec or Canada, and he has given me tremendous volumes of information, and you may want to check out his Vimeo site because he has a lot of really cool videos of the alchemical processes, and he's filming what he's doing, okay? So, before we get to the black phase of alchemy, when we're working with our gold, our king, okay, we have to purify mercury. Why? Because mercury is used to break down gold and create the philosopher's stone. Combine as an amalgam, break it down. So the way we purify mercury is sort of complicated. The main ingredient here to break down our king, okay, is something called star Regulus of antimony. We use antimony to purify mercury. Now, where does antimony come from? It's a metal. It comes from an ore called stibnite. Now, stibnite has a lot of bad stuff in it. It's got arsenic and mercury, amongst other things, and those things are deadly, okay, in terms of the fumes that they create in the laboratory. So typically, when you're working with an ore like stibnite, and what's about to follow here, you would take this thing outside and cook it, process it, because the fumes would kill you. All right, so here's an image of Isaac Newton's notes concerning this particular recipe, the ingredients for the star Regulus of antimony. And I believe Isaac Newton probably got this from our old pal George Starkey, who we mentioned in the first section, or Irenaeus Philalethes. And excuse me, I said his name, and I mispronounced his name. It's Irenaeus Philalethes in the previous section. Pause for a refreshing beverage. And so, without any further delay, let's get right into the nitty-gritty here. We're talking about these chemical operations and the metals and the chemicals that are involved. So, the first thing we're going to take a look at is the ingredients for the star Regulus of antimony. This is from Isaac Newton or George Starkey, aka Irenaeus Philalethes. I'm wondering, I just wonder sometimes why my brain doesn't just fall out of my head. Okay, so we're going to take 2 parts of stibnite. Remember, stibnite is the ore. And stibnite was referred traditionally by alchemists as the whore. Why? Because stibnite gets around. Stibnite plays with all the metals. It plays well with all the metals. And I believe at some point it was believed to have been the origin of metals, kind of like a mercury sulfur thing, mercury sulfur stibnite thing, something like that. Then we're going to take 1 part iron filings. All right, now why iron? Because iron is used in this operation to remove the sulfur from the stibnite. It attracts the sulfur and allows the antimony to flow out of the stibnite to the bottom of the crucible. And then, remember, of course, I forgot to say this, iron filings are also known as the House of the Ram. Why? Well, because remember, iron's affiliated with Mars, which is affiliated with Aries, which is affiliated with the Ram. Whew. We're getting there. 4 parts of burnt tartar. Tartar was taken from wine barrels. All right, and then niter, which is a salt, is sprinkled on there as another ingredient. So we've got 2 parts stibnite, 1 part iron filings, 4 parts burnt tartar, and niter. Now, we're going to take these ingredients and we're going to purify mercury. So we can combine the mercury with the gold, which is the 3rd step here. Okay, so the first step is we're going to take all the ingredients and put them in a crucible and heat them until they fuse into an amalgam, all right? An amalgam is basically a combination of metals. And if you look, see this picture here, that's what a crucible looks like. And it usually involves some pretty intense heat when you're using a crucible, right? The antimony, or the offspring of Saturn, remember that from the previous reading, will be extracted from the dissolving stibnite. And when the stibnite dissolves, all right, it's called the whore's blood. I don't mean to make light of this. It's just that some of these things, the expressions are really pretty wild. The whore's blood, and fall to the bottom of the crucible. So the antimony will be released from the stibnite and fall to the bottom of the crucible. And you want to be doing this outside, remember, because there's a lot of poisonous fumes going on here. All right, then niter is employed to further purify what is now called the Regulus. All right, the Regulus, again, there's that word, again, that root, like regal, R-E-G, Regulus, meaning it is the amalgam of the king, right? Because we're gonna combine this with gold, and it's gonna react with it. Now, once that is done, you remove the crucible and you remove the star Regulus of antimony and add silver, the doves of Diana, remember that, right? And copper, the doves of Venus, and add mercury. Then we're gonna take the mercury and we're gonna combine it with the star Regulus of antimony, which we've created. And there's a picture of the star Regulus, and it's kind of cool because as you further purify antimony, it gets this star-like pattern. It becomes crystallized. Kind of cool, right? So we're going to take the star Regulus of antimony, add silver, copper, all right, and the mercury, all right, and then we're going to create an amalgam, and we're going to distill this amalgam 7 to 10 times. In other words, we want to purify this because, hey, we're doing this. We're purifying mercury. Now, the silver in this amalgam helps to animate the mercury. It takes what alchemists call the secret fire within the antimony and transfer that to the mercury. Okay? The secret fire is kind of like your soul. Okay? It would be the alchemist's soul. Well, it's the soul of the metal. Remember, metals and plants and everything has a spirit and a soul, according to alchemists, right? And I kind of buy into that. I think it's a fascinating belief, and I think it's perfectly relevant. I mean, crystals are very powerful things, and metals, all these things have energies to them. I believe this is true as well. So we're taking that secret fire, that soul of the metal, of antimony, and silver helps. It's like a bridge. It takes it and brings it over to the mercury, and it animates the mercury. Okay, because now it has the soul of antimony within it. And now we have our purified mercury. Okay? Okay, I hope that made sense. Now, we're still not there yet because we have to take that purified mercury and add it to the gold. Okay? So, this particular section is called the Rebis, and we're going to get into the Rebis a little later when we're actually talking about the phases, okay? Now, the Rebis meaning two things. We're taking two harmonious things, the king and the queen, okay? The mercury represents the white queen, okay? And the gold represents the king. So in this beautiful image, you see the king and the queen together, okay? And they are going to create a child, all right, which is the Philosopher's Stone. I'm going to read from this book, Real Alchemy by Robert Allen Bartlett, because although it contains many ways to create the Philosopher's Stone, one of the methods he uses is a very simple method, which I'm going to employ for this video. So we're going to take the mercury and the gold, and we're going to put them together in this operation, okay? So it says, take 4 parts philosophical mercury and amalgamate it with 1 part of pure gold powder in a glass mortar. Wash the amalgam with water until it is clean and shining, okay? So we take our purified mercury and we put it together with the gold, wash it, place the amalgam into a long neck glass vessel up to 1/3 fill. So we're going to take that and put it into a flask or vessel because many different types of things can be used. All right, warm that vessel about 120 degrees and seal it airtight. Now, what alchemists would do, they would take this vessel and they would literally melt the top of the vessel so that it would create like a vacuum inside the vessel. And that's where the term hermetically sealed comes from. Okay, lots of revelations today, right? Lots of headaches too, right? Okay, so I'm going to read from Robert Allen Bartlett's most excellent book called Real Alchemy. And we're going to actually, finally, get to the black stage, okay? So he says here, the sealed vessel is now set to digest at about 120 degrees for about 3 months. We're 3 months now at this heat. And the matter will begin to darken and finally turn black. This is called the nigredo or black stage. So here we are at the black stage of alchemy, right? We've purified our mercury. We've gotten all our ingredients, our stibnite, our antimony, our copper, our gold, the doves of Diana, the doves of Venus. We've got the whore's blood. We got all this stuff, and we're putting it all together now. And what's happened is we put all these together, we sealed the flask, and we are heating it at 120 degrees for 3 months, and it turns black. That is called the black phase. Whew, finally there, right? Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the black phase. And there are 2 operations within this black phase, calcination and dissolution. Dissolution isn't always used, but calcination is always used in one form or another. Calcination is basically breaking down the metal, right? Remember we talked about the wet way and the dry way? Either of those methods can be utilized in the black phase here, okay? And I promise that was the roughest part of this whole thing, getting through the purification of the mercury. But I wanted you to see what alchemists do, what they go through. And really, I'm telling you, I'm sure I'm skipping a step here or there, because I'm not a practicing alchemist, but I wanted you to see the process involved. And the reason I'm doing this is because when we get to certain imagery in Atalanta Fugiens, it's gonna click with you. You're gonna, oh my God, I remember seeing that in that particular wonderful alchemy video that Tony did. Okay, seriously though, when you begin to unlock these doors, okay, even if we're doing it on a superficial level, a higher level, or here, right? We're not alchemists. We're not doing these things. And in Atalanta Fugiens, it'll bring such a wonderful level of understanding. It's just so cool. Okay, we're gonna get there. So so again, what we're doing is we are breaking down the metal. And this particular image from Atalanta Fugiens, by the way, is emblem number 28, and it's entitled, "The King is sitting in a vaporous bath and is freed from the black gall by the physician Farut." Okay, not going to get into the black gall and physician Farut. That's for another video. That's for when we get there. However, you can see the king, our king, all right, the gold, all right, you'll find him in various stages of suffering when the calcination or the black phase is illustrated in alchemical manuscripts. Okay, so the king is suffering because we're breaking them down. Okay, now another image from a different alchemical manuscript, a Benedictine monk named Basil Valentine created a work called Azoth, and I'm not getting into that's like a big loaded word. I'm not going to get into it. We have enough stuff to work on here, right? Which is published in 1613. This particular image, as you can see, is a calcination image. Why? Well, we've got kind of a corpse there, and another symbol besides the king being tortured. Another symbol is a raven or a skeleton or a corpse. These are all symbols of the black phase, the calcination phase. And this image beautifully illustrates, and as you can see, if you look all the way to the right, you see that black star, and that's a symbol for Saturn because Saturn was affiliated with the calcination process. There are planetary energies involved here too. Remember correspondence, right? So that's kind of a really good image that demonstrates or illustrates the calcination process, okay? The second process within the black phase, we're almost done, I promise, with the black phase, is dissolution. Dissolution is the addition of water or some kind of liquid. You take your metal and you immerse it in a liquid for a variety of reasons, okay? And I want to show you another image from Atalanta Fugiens, all right? And this particular image is emblem 31, and it is entitled, "The king swimming in the sea cries out with a loud voice, 'He that delivers me shall have great reward.'" Because our king, of course, is gold. And the reward, of course, is the evolution to the Philosopher's Stone, which is our medicine. All right. So we're finished with the black stage. Now this is the longest one, and I apologize for that, but it's so important that we get all the details here so you can further understand the coming phases. After the black phase is a little stage in between, which I didn't mention, called the peacock's tail, all right? Now what happens is, this peacock's tail phase is sometimes put after the albedo phase, sometimes after the white phase, after the black phase. I'm putting it after the black phase because it makes more sense to me in terms of an operation, because we have our black amalgam, right? The mercury and the gold are now blackened through the heating. So after a while, a film appears on top of the blackened amalgam, and it's an oily substance, and the oil begins to burst into an array of beautiful colors, and that's known as the peacock's tail. All right, and this particular image, another one from the beautifully illustrated Splendor Solis, emblem number 16, literally shows us, as you can see, there's the vessel, and you look at the top of the vessel, and it is sealed, and within the vessel, of course, is a beautiful peacock tail. Now, that takes care of the black phase of alchemy. Thank you for sticking with me. I promise the next two phases are nowhere near as long as this, okay? But I think they're still going to be pretty cool. I think you'll appreciate them. Thank you for staying with me. I worked really, really hard on this for the past few months. All right, well, anyway, let's go on to the white phase. Okay. Our king has endured the fires of calcination, the drowning in the sea of dissolution. Okay, he survived all this stuff. All right, our great king, gold, and our queen, Mercury, this new amalgam, putting it together. Okay, so the white phase. Hey, my candles are melting out. I've been talking so long. Okay, so the white phase is about purification. It's taking our amalgam of mercury and gold, okay, and we're purifying it. So I'm going to read again from this wonderful book, Real Alchemy. This is now we finished the black stage, and now it says, once the matter is entirely black, gently raise the heat to about 150 degrees and continue the digestion. After 2 or 3 months, the matter will acquire an iridescence at the surface with colors reminiscent of a peacock's tail. Okay, so this is the peacock's tail phase, which is what the adepts call this stage. As the digestion continues, the matter will gradually become lighter, marking the beginning of the albedo stage or the white stage. All right, so here we are in the process. Now, there's another 3 months in this process, after 2 or 3 months here. So remember, the black stage took 3 months. The white stage, the white phase, is going to take another 3 months. Okay, so right now we're a half a year into this. We're 6 months into this, right? Now, the purification stage has 2 components to it. Okay, one is called separation. Okay, and we're going to start with that. Now, the separation component deals with taking, our amalgam and further purifying it with filters, and that can be putting it through paper filters and things like that, or using chamois cloths to push mercury through. But in this case, this is in a sealed vessel. Okay, so what I want to show you is a really cool emblem, emblem 11 from Atalanta Fugiens, okay, which demonstrates the white phase and the significance of the white phase to the alchemist. It says, "Whiten Latona and tear up your books." Who's Latona? She's the mother of Apollo and Diana. And as you can look in this image, you can see there's Apollo with his sun face, okay, and Diana with the moon on her head, the little children. The philosophy is that you can read about it all you want, but you may not necessarily understand it until you do the work. Hold on. Now, this is a really cool image because basically what Michael Meyer is saying is, okay, you've gotten to the white phase, you're good, okay? You know that the operation is going to go smoothly. You still have to be vigilant, okay? But in terms of the theory, you've put the theory into practice, and that's what he's talking about here in this image, which is really cool. Another way I like to look at the separation process, to put it really simply, is think of a chocolate chip cookie. And I think I used this analogy in a previous video. Okay, what we're doing is we're taking the chocolate chips out of the cookie and we're eating it, right? Or we're taking the Oreo, we're breaking it open, we're eating the white stuff inside. What is that white stuff, by the way? Does anybody know? I don't know, but it sure tastes good. Okay, so that's what's going on here. We're taking the remnants of the black phase and the peacock's tail, okay, and we are filtering it. But in this case, it's in a sealed vessel, so we're just going to continue to apply heat here. But I wanted to give you a sense of what the separation phase is, okay? Now, the second operation within the white phase is called conjunction. That's kind of like, remember we were working with the plant, and the alchemist separated the oil and the alcohol and the salt, right? And they recombined it to create the spagyric. That's essentially what we're doing here, all right? Conjunction is kind of bringing our different elements together, or different pieces together. Of course, in this particular method that Robert Allen Bartlett's talking about, it's already in the vessel. Okay, so this would be something if you were working with, if you weren't working with this particular means or method, you would be doing something different. Okay, and that's what this is showing here. But what I want to show you is another really cool image from Splendor Solis. It's plate number 3, entitled "The Night of the Double Fountain." And in this really cool image, you can see there's a knight there, and he's got 7 stars around his head. Of course, that's the planets or the 7 metals, all right? He's got a sword that it says in the manuscript that is made of antimony and lead, okay? Antimony is certainly a big ingredient here. And the fountains he stands upon, one is a fountain of mercury and the other is a fountain of sulfur. So that would be the combination of mercury and sulfur, which we're not doing in this operation, but I wanted to show you when you see fountains typically in that configuration with mercury, sulfur, or gold and mercury, whatever, that means the combination of these two things to create the amalgam. And that takes us to the end of the white stage. Okay, so remember, the white stage is all about purification. We're taking the remnants of the black phase and the peacock's tail, and we're combining them and purifying them. Okay? I hope this made sense. And off to the final phase, the red phase of alchemy. Hello, here we are. We finally made it. The red phase of the alchemical process. Okay? I'm going to read to you again from Bartlett's book here. It will take about 9 more months for the matter to become entirely white. So remember we had 3 months for the black phase, 3 months for the white phase, and now 9 more months technically. So technically the white phase is probably about a year, 12 months, will become entirely white. When this happens, the heat is very slowly raised to about 250 degrees over the course of several months. Now we went from 120 degrees to 150 degrees, 120 degrees for the black phase, 150 degrees for the white phase, and 250 degrees roughly for the beginnings of the red stage. Now, remember, we're talking about a year or so of constant flame. So when you work with the metals, not only is it inherently dangerous, but you have to really be vigilant. You have to constantly monitor what's going on in your experiment, okay? So this is quite a process, and that's what I want to give you guys a sense of how long this took, what was involved, the complexity of it. And again, I simplified a lot of stuff, all right? It's a lot more complex than this is demonstrating, okay? So I'm going to continue reading here. The whiteness gradually gives way to a yellowness that deepens with time into red. This is the rubedo stage, or the red stage of the stone. Once this point is reached, the matter should be digested at about 400 degrees for an additional 2 months in order to mature. Okay, so now we're talking about something like 19 months to get to the red stage here at this point. And finally, he says, allow the matter to slowly cool, then break the vessel to remove the contents, which is the red stone in the first degree. Really cool. So now you have the Philosopher's Stone. There are other operations that occur after this, but they are specific to what the alchemist is going to be using the stone for. So as I mentioned earlier, if the stone is going to be used for medicinal purposes, there is a particular operation or series of operations that are involved in that. If it's going to be used to transform common metals into gold, then that's a different operation as well, and we'll get into those. Okay. Now, there are 3 operations within the red phase. Okay. The first one is fermentation. Now, what happens here is our our amalgam, all right, has become somewhat weakened by the calcination process, the white phase, the black phase and the white phase are purifying it so it loses a little bit of its energy. So it is infused with additional things, okay? Now, we didn't do that in this particular thing because I wanted to keep it simple, okay? But just know that there are other operations in the red phase. But one thing I just want to focus on, which is a very important concept in the alchemical process, is the red phase, or at least the fermentation component of it, is typically represented by something called a rebis. And I mentioned the rebis earlier. The rebis is, remember, we have our king and our queen, the masculine and feminine energies. The rebis is the perfect, harmonious balance of masculine and feminine energies. It is the stone, essentially. And there's an image from Atalanta Fugiens which illustrates it, and I'm sorry I couldn't block out the naughty bits. But anyway, it's emblem 33, called the hermaphrodite, which is the rebis, lying like a dead man in darkness wants fire. So rebis is a Latin word that comes from resbina, meaning a double thing. Okay, so again, the rebis is this perfect, harmonious balance of masculine and feminine energies. And essentially, it's our Mercury and our gold combined into perfection to create the Philosopher's Stone. Okay, and that just about finishes the operations and the 3 phases of alchemy. And I hope you enjoyed this. I truly hope that this has been helpful in understanding the alchemical process and how it relates to Atalanta Fugiens. I know there was a lot of stuff here, a lot of information, but it's information that I could not skip over. I wanted you to get a really good sense of what goes on, or at least some sense of what goes on in the alchemical laboratory and within the alchemist, and how this applies to Atalanta Fugiens. I hope I've done a good job on that. This was a very, very difficult process for me because I'm not a practicing alchemist. So I had to get some advice from some very kind and helpful people. And in addition to that, I had to do a lot of reading. A lot of reading of alchemical manuscripts and a lot of reading from a variety of books, which have helped me understand. A lot of Robert Allen Bartlett's books are wonderful. So if you're really interested in alchemy and want to understand the spiritual and laboratory processes, I recommend you look at his work. And he has a wonderful website called spagiricus.org. Or .com, I think. Anyway, I'll put the address right now. You can see it. So I'm fumbling over something I don't need to fumble over. But anyway, thank you again. And this is really cool because guess what? Now we can get back to Atalanta Fugiens. We've looked at spagyrics. We've looked at the work with metals and minerals. And now we can go to emblem number 3. The woman washing clothes, or do as the woman does. All right, and let's get to it, okay? I've got a lot of work ahead of me, but a lot of fun too. I hope you've enjoyed this brief side trip to explain some of the alchemical processes, and I hope I've done a good job. Thank you very much.